lost the game.
Are you kidding me?
Alrighty, so I'm gonna grab one or two more.
That did not sound good. Are you okay?
It was a cardboard box tipping off of a shelf in the other room. How the crap did you guys hear that?
It sounded like you biffed it.
Yeah.
No. It was a quiet cardboard box sound to me, but apparently the mic didn't have anything else to pick up on. So
it was like.
Okay, so let's see. B-Mix is
Weird. You're weird.
Yeah.
yes, it is a little weird. It's also a stoneware that's a bit close to porcelain. Porcelain is a really fine particle clay. Porcelain can be, depending on who you talk to, it's either defined by its translucence, which is the Western definition of porcelain. And this is a bit of porcelain. Now, obviously, before it's fired, it's not translucent. But it's really fine particle, really high plasticity. That also means it's high shrinking, right? The shrinkage rate is quite high. And therefore, it's, like it will spin around. Oh, this one I did that stupid, this is a little on the dry side, and when I rolled that onto some dry crap, it did the weird where it rolls up. I don't know how much you can tell on this, but porcelain is very fine particle. It carves really, really nicely. It feels really nice and smooth. But it shrinks a lot, which means it's liable to crack, and like really high plasticity.
Isn't porcelain better for people throwing on the wheel?
Yeah, there are people who sculpt in porcelain, and when you make porcelain thin enough, you can see through it. Again, translucent, not transparent. So it's kind of like paper. You can see through a bit of paper, few pieces of paper. You get very much thickness in there, and you can't see through it anymore. But people will do like lamp shades and things out of porcelain sometimes. And it's really, really smooth. It carves really nicely when it's in the leather hard stages. And that's what all of your fine china, particularly from China, Japan, Korea, what all of that is. It's found a bit more naturally there, so it's more commonly used there. And if you want to look into what the capabilities of porcelain are, look into Jingdezhen, China. The city's entire economy is based on porcelain. Like they have ceramic sleeves of porcelain sleeves around their like street signs. And one of my professors, when he was there, he said he saw a car accident and they smashed into the thing and shattered the porcelain, and they had it replaced like the next day. They just have, porcelain is a really heavy industry, and there's some cool videos they have on YouTube that can show what the abilities of it are. The problem with throwing it on the wheel is when you pull it up, it has a tendency to sag down. It works a little bit like, what's that stuff called? There's oobleck, almost. Like you're when you're pulling it, it feels like it's thin because of the way, like it feels good, or you pull it up and then it just kind of slowly shifts back down. Not quite like oobleck, but it's a little bit similar. B-Mix stands up a lot better. It's a stoneware, and it's not quite as plastic, but it's a little more, I hear a lot of people say, toothpastey. So, it's not as plastic, but it's got some of the same looks. It still carves nicely. And instead of firing a translucent white, it fires more of a barely translucent. It's got a little bit of translucence to it still, because there is quite a bit of porcelain in it. But it stands up a little bit better. It doesn't crack quite as much. And it's just a touch more grayish. Although some porcelains will fire gray also. And porcelain isn't all the same thing. Neither is B-Mix. B-Mix is based on a particular formula, but you'll hear everybody using a different one. B-Mix with sand, of course. You've got the same thing, but you add sand or grog. And grog is better. Grog is a clay mixed with pre-fired clay. So this is B-Mix with sand. You can see the little speckles in there. No, you can't, but there are some. And it's got similar plasticity, but the sand gives it a bit of it reduces the shrinkage some, and it gives it a bit of, they call it tooth, and the grittiness helps with some joints, and it definitely helps things stand up better and kind of stay together better.
So with the B-Mix with sand, is that better for sculpting than normal B-Mix?
Yes, it is better for sculpting than normal B-Mix. And it also particularly, it depends on what you're looking for. There's a lot of people who sculpt out of B-Mix. This is LBM. It's gritty, and maybe you can see the grit in this one. No, it looks perfectly smooth on that screen to me.
It's got
a little bit more grit. This would be, you can feel the grit in this one when you're working it. With the B-Mix with sand, it's a very fine sand. And like I said, B-Mix with grog is pre-fired stuff, so it's going to shrink even less. And the really fine grog can be made. The grog is also more expensive. So I get B-Mix with sand because it's cheaper. But you can get B-Mix with grog, and it's a lot better that way. I have a red B-Mix with grog, but like I said, it's a bit more. And then I don't know. You can see the grit, and the more the grit is, the more people will recommend it as a sculpture clay. Also for raku firings, you want something that's gritty, and preferably with some grog in it, some sand. It helps with thermal shock. That's suddenly going from stiff to soft. And then there's various versions of the same kind of clays that come in red. This is Maya red, and it's a more, like reddish red, Jamaica. This one's a little more of an orangey red. And then they all fire differently as well. The different colors as when they get fired. And how they react with glazes. So I've gotten a bunch of different red clays over the years, and I still have a little bit of most of them. And this is what they look like fired to cone 10, and this is what they look like fired to cone 5. I'll line them up with the ones that they belong to. So Maya red at cone 5 in an electric firing is pretty light beige. And then in a reduction firing, it's a nice rich red. B-mix with grog red has the smoothest texture of all of these. Well, this one's pretty close, but this one's not as deep of a red. And B-mix with grog red also has kind of a nice terracotta color at cone 5 in an oxidation firing. CA2, it's pretty pale cone 5, but a pretty nice red at cone 10. Dark brown, again at cone 5 and at cone 10. And Black Mountain. There's also some clays that are like black in an electric firing at cone 5. You can get clays that are formulated to look like just about anything. There are literally hundreds of choices especially if you go between your cone 5, cone 10, low fire, and at least with Aardvark and Laguna, not to mention there are other suppliers with their own particular formulas. And you can also special order a particular formula that you want. Soldate 60 is a really common clay. It's extra gritty. This 60 mesh sand in it is a pretty heavy grit in there. And like one of the teachers was talking about how that's the only stuff he uses. He hates B-mix, hates how smooth, the smooth, and he makes everybody, especially when you're working on the wheel, you want that extra grit. And when people complain to him that it's, hurting their hands, he's like, well, no, you just got to keep going. You got to get calluses. And to an extent, he's right. And I learned with a gritty clay. I learned with LBM, and I think it's better to learn with clay with some grit. I think it helps you control the moisture better when it feels extra gritty. That it gives you better feedback as far as whether you're using enough water. And it's much easier to control, but with adults, I didn't see anybody with their hand ground through. With the kids that I'm not willing to go where he does with it. Like, oh yeah, just wait until the calluses develop, keep grinding at it. That's something I'm not willing to go there with. So I will, let them know, hey, if you're controlling the moisture right, this won't happen. But in the meantime, let's get you some B-mix so it stops hurting. Which, is what it is. It's a bit of a handicap with their learning, but that's better than it causing injury. So those are all of the different clays, and they look quite different. This one's Maya Red, and you can see the difference, before and after. And then paper clay there's various formulas of paper clay. Paper clay is awesome for sculpting. This is a paper clay based on Vegas buff, which is similar to B-mix, just a little more grayish. And it's got a lot of paper pulp in there, paper fibers. You can kind of see, I know I can. Sheesh. Resolution's not quite good enough on there. But with paper in it, it doesn't move like clay. It's a kind of a whole different thing. You try and pull and stretch it, and it just kind of shifts and then tears because it's half paper. And so those paper fibers are acting, it's kind of like pulling on paper and cardboard. It doesn't shift at all until it just tears. But you can get it to go and hold its shape when it's really, really thin. You can also make attachments when things are bone dry. So paper clay has some really cool properties. If I ever taught a sculpture class if I ever got a separate sculpting room, we would use paper clay. The problem is that it tends to grow mold on the surface. I mean, you can see how thin that is and how well it's holding its shape, right? That should have fallen and torn off and fallen right by now with this being soft. it will grow mold, and on the inside of it, it grows like the bacteria that decays plants in lake mud, and so it smells like poo. When I do it, I put a little bit of bleach water in it, and when you let it sit for a long time, it tends to smell bad. And then this stuff in particular, when you buy it, this stuff smells like pond. It's kind of a nicer, like moss in a pond rather than, that poo smelling lake mud. This is the Aardvark Galt, Rosette Galt wrote the book on both metaphorically and literally on paper clay. She was there were two people pioneering with it at the same time, one in Australia and one in America, and she's the one in America. And apparently, if you get into it and you write her emails, she'll respond, and she's very approachable that way. I haven't ever tried, but yeah. And then there's paper clay that also has grit and grog, and because they're like, oh, it's a sculpture clay. When you burn out the paper, it's just the same. It's got the same shrinkage, and it's a regular clay, but a little lighter weight per volume because of the volume that the paper was taking up. The little straws of the fibers inside of paper fibers inside of there, they act like little straws and transfer the moisture. And that's what makes your attachments hard, right? Is you're slipping and scoring, is to get some moisture on there so it sticks, and then you have to score to make that moisture penetrate, and sometimes you have to back things up and let them sit for a while so they don't crack. And the reason that, when you try and attach something to bone dry clay, it just won't. Also, the bone dry clay is slaking. And then, so it's also 3 times as strong in its green strength, meaning before firing. So this is something I made I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. It's just bone dry. I never fired it. And normally bone dry is the most fragile state, right? You have to be all careful with it. So this is something you should never, ever, ever do with greenware, right? That should have shattered by now. Holding it by that edge, that would have shattered it. I couldn't, I'm hitting that hard. My knuckle hurts. And it's quite strong. I made a bunch of spherical molds and made a bunch of projects, put it all together in college, my senior year. And I had to use they were about yay thick. The stuff I pressed in there was about that thick, 1/2 inch or so. And I had to use a jigsaw to cut through it. When I let it get bone dry, and then I was cutting out holes and attaching it. I did all of the attachments bone dry, which is just bizarre. And they don't all hold amazingly well. It's not a miracle thing, but it's a different material with a lot, significantly expanded possibilities. Oh, by the way, I would be very much willing to give you little, like a pound each of some red clay. And this is stuff that I had as leftovers when I was doing my marbled, here, let me tip the camera back down. My marbled sculptures, or the marbling I did on the pottery things. And then anyway, I just took all of my scraps and squished them up and rolled them out into a slab, and then I cut that up and kind of scraped at it. And I'm thinking these look like they would make, interesting. It's the big ugly necklaces. And this particular one is going to look like rocks. So it'd be a pretty specialized sort of jewelry. But if any of you are interested in, especially if you're doing some small and you want to do some jewelry, You can get that. Oh, and one more really cool thing. If you're doing jewelry and working that small, one of the things that they did at the art teacher conference this year was they talked about doing raku firings with a microwave. And so they have these little glass microwave kilns. Let me switch back to my other thing. Give me a sec. Okay. Hopefully I can find this quickly on Amazon for you. I had it saved, but let me just do microwave kiln. Whoops. Yeah. So these, they're mostly for like fusing glass and stuff. And this, you know, like the first time, you know, I look at this, I see this, and I'm like, oh, that's gotta be like plastic, you know? Oh, fusing glass. Yeah, I bet they have plastic. You put it in the microwave, but no, it's actually up to like 1800 or so temperatures you can get. There's just a little tiny pinhole in the top, and you're supposed to stick it in a microwave and watch until that thing goes red. They said that you should never do it in a microwave you're going to cook food in at the thing, but they were also talking about the raku. You'd have to look into that on your own. And generally there are chemicals that kind of leach out of things in firings like that. So I definitely wouldn't recommend doing it in one. But if you got an old microwave, you know, I didn't push this when we first started working at home because I would have said, hey, yeah, go to the DI and buy an old microwave. But the DI closed, and you're not supposed to go places like that. But if you've got an old microwave, you know, $25, and you've got something where you can do your own firings and firing experiments, that's pretty darn cool. So, you know, there's all of these different things. Kiln paper shelf. Maybe that's supposed to go underneath it. I'm like, what good is paper inside of a kiln? Unless it's made out of, they call it paper. It can be used only once, made of ceramic fiber. Oh, okay, yeah. So it is ceramic fiber sheets. Those for $10. Like, yeah, I want to try this. But they were doing, you know, like, and they have a microwave kiln instruction manual on Kindle for $0. So, oh, no, it's only on 0 because I have Kindle Unlimited trial right now. It's just a trial of Kindle Unlimited. So, but otherwise it'd be, I'm going to read it for free though. You know, why not? Oh yeah, and Arithmetist, that's good too. Actually, I wanted to talk to you guys about that. Like, try listening to audiobooks while you make art. Because if it works for you as well as it works for me, it's the only way to go. And you can listen to, like I do, listen to fantasy books mostly, and all fiction for a type of entertainment that I think is also important for mental health for me. Or you can, you know, like on Audible, they have these things like the great courses, and you can listen to a lecture series on art history or science or religion, or I've got one that I've listened to that's the history of human language, and another one that is religions from around the world, and just kind of a summary of just what different religions believe. No particular preaching or convincing of any one, but just understanding the world religions. And anyway, so you listen to some of those. Your first book on Audible is going to be free when you get a new membership, but then it costs after that. If you do a Kindle Unlimited trial, you can get Audible to go with those, and you can get a few more for free, but only for a month. Your first book for free on Audible is free forever. And if you're interested in some recommendations, I have like Mistborn is a Brandon's. If you're into fantasy, I'm like, okay, Mistborn, and it's 30 hours long, so your free book goes further. And then I've got a couple of collections that are longer still, because I listen to enough that I'm like, oh, if it's only going to take me 3 hours to listen to, that's not worth me even buying, because it's going to be too expensive. It's got to give me at least 10 hours, and 60 is better. Yeah, so microwave kilns, and you could do your little jewelry stuff in there, and you can even I could even probably get you a little bit of a tube of the low fire glaze or something, of a glaze or two, to use, and then you could take them home and you could do your own little jewelry firings in there or something, depending, especially if I gave you like the sample things. I've got some sample sizes that I've picked up from the various conferences, and the sample of one of the glazes, some of those were free to me. I mean, it makes it a bit unfair if I give somebody a sample and not the other people, but at the same time, I give it to whoever's going to use it. And I don't know how high these go, how hot these go. I haven't ever gotten one or used one. I was planning on it when getting back from that, but looking into it sometime. But all of this shutdown happened, and I was looking into very different things. So yeah, we are way over time.